Welcome in to Stop the Takes, football podcast focused on getting back to just talking ball. I'm Dakota, that's Austin, and today we continue our NFL draft reviews with the AFC West. We have wrapped up all of the North, East, and South now, so tackling the final frontier of the West with the AFC West today. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and dive into this, starting with the Denver Broncos. They were kind of a wild card a bit at pick 20, uh, being mocked anything from tight end to running back a lot. But they went in a different direction and kind of got gifted somebody, I think, in our opinion. So they actually go Jahdae Barron, corner out of Texas at pick 20. What were your thoughts on that, Austin?
I loved their first round pick, man. I thought Jahdae Barron was maybe possibly the cleanest cornerback prospect in this entire draft. Super versatile player. He can play pretty much anywhere in the secondary. And I thought he's one of the better players in the draft as well. So I think getting that at 20 was, like you said, they were kind of gifted Jahdae Barron. And I love that they didn't force running back in round one. Like you said, that was mocked to them pretty much the entire offseason. People looked at the Broncos roster and they said, well, there's not a lot of holes on this roster. One of the glaring holes, if you will, on the roster was running back. But they didn't force that in round one, which I thought was a really good start to their draft, like I said, in round one. So loved their first pick.
Yeah, I agree with you on that too. I think we were both pretty big fans of his. Saw him go anywhere from like at one point in the mock process as high as 6 to the Raiders. So it does feel like a bit of a gift because he usually went somewhere in the teens at the latest. But incredibly productive corner at Texas. Pretty athletic as well. Ran a 4.39. And to your point, he's versatile. You know, he could play outside, he could play in the slot. You can kind of do whatever with him, and he's pretty good in man and zone. He can just kind of do it all. And you know, pairing that alongside Pat Surtain feels pretty good. And I think, you know, kind of being in the AFC West, you know, you're dealing with Patrick Mahomes. So if you have two corners that can lock down guys, that's one way to beat him.
That's true, man. No question about it. Right now, he's slated to be the starting nickelback, according to our land. So they still have Riley Moss on the outside, and of course Pat Surtain, as you just mentioned, and Jahdae Barron. Listen, that's a really good secondary. One of the better secondaries in the league now, I would say. So they really hit a home run with their first pick, dude. Getting one of the best players in the draft, honestly, at pick number 20.
Yeah, and I forgot they signed, you know, Hufunga
Yep.
from San Francisco. So that secondary is suddenly looking like one of the best. It was already really good because of how good Pat Surtain is, you know, defensive player of the year. But now it's looking like potentially one of the best in the entire league. So love that pick for them and that fit in Denver. They then do grab a running back, which they were mocked a lot in the first round. But they kind of went with an interesting one. A bit of the reach considered to the, you know, in terms of the consensus. But again, a lot of these running backs were kind of pick your poison, you know, which skill set, which size, which profile you're looking for. And he has Sean Payton written all over him.
He does. He does, man. It is going to be interesting to see what Sean Payton does with RJ Harvey. He's 205, ran 4.4. That's pretty fast for his size, to be honest. He has decent running back size as far as his weight's concerned. But I was a little surprised they just decided to go Harvey over some of the other guys. Because I don't know if he's going to be considered a 3-down back or not. I don't know if he's more of like a third down kind of back, but right now he is slated to start, which isn't very surprising. They're kind of depleted at running back, and they clearly wanted one in the draft. I think they just didn't expect. They honestly probably would have taken Hampton if Jahdae Barron wasn't there. It's one of those things. So it is kind of interesting how that worked out for him. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how Sean Payton uses him in that offense, though.
Yeah, he's only 5'8", so he's got a little bit of that Darren Sproles size to him. So I guarantee that drew Sean Payton in. Another one of these in these, you know, with this COVID stuff, another one of these guys though that was in college for 6 years. So it's always one of those, you know, he had back-to-back pretty productive years. And honestly, he was pretty productive in 2022. So he's got the production there. He's just in college for a long time, which, you know, with the running backs, how long their legs last is interesting. So I think he does fit what Sean Payton likes to do with his running backs. So probably more of a fit thing than anything in terms of the value there.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that, and also it's nice because you do come away with your starting running back in the second round instead of forcing
Sure.
it in the first round. So now you get to cover two starters with your first two picks, which is nice, man. It's always nice to come away with a starter in the second round. So plugging RJ Harvey in there.
Yeah, to go alongside Aldrick Esme from last year, pretty different skill set. So I like having a versatile running back room as well. So they've added that as well. Then they go with another interesting pick. Broncos had probably one of the more interesting drafts just from a pure value and which guys they took over who. And they take Pat Bryant, wide receiver out of Illinois, who just did not test very well. He ran a 4.61 at 6'2", 204. Not very athletic guy. But that was the receiver that I definitely thought they would take a receiver, but Pat Bryant being the one they go with was a little bit interesting.
It was. This is really the first pick where I think things fell off the rails a little bit for the Broncos, just because, in my opinion, and the consensus opinion, for whatever that's worth, thought there were better receivers available. I mean, that's just the reality. I didn't expect Pat Bryant to go in the third round.
Yeah.
It's also interesting that they're still attacking wide receiver as well. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but again, I don't know if he's gonna see the field very early on. Maybe he will. Maybe Sean Payton has a plan for him, but yeah, I was a bit surprised because I mean that feels like a Sutton replacement. Honestly, just the way he's built,
Yeah.
his play style,
Yeah.
and it's like I don't see Pat Bryant being better than Cortland Sutton anytime soon. So that was a little bit surprising that they took that kind of skill set in the third round.
Yeah, and I don't hate them adding more depth to their wide receiver room. It's a lot of guys you're still kind of hoping break out. With like Marvin Mims is starting to put it together a bit more, and then Troy Franklin, which is unfortunate last year, was either getting open and dropping it, or Bo Nix missed him, so they just didn't connect yet. But one interesting thing I saw is with his height and size and what he ran and everything, is that Sean Payton was kind of comparing Pat Bryant to Michael Thomas.
Mm.
And was like he could be that for us, which Michael Thomas did produce more than what his like athletic profile suggested that he would, but also a bold thing to put on Pat Bryant's head to try to beat a guy who literally like broke a receptions record at one point. So
Yeah, that is interesting because it is one of those things where, again, it comes down to fit. A coach sees him as like a certain skill set, then maybe he'll be able to fill that role. But that's, like you said, that's big shoes to fill, man. Because for a few years there, Michael Thomas was one of the best receivers in the league. So it's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah, they had some depth though, and then they double up at edge. The next two picks, Savion Jones, LSU, and then Q Robinson. Savion, pretty lower production guy, but pretty athletic for his size at 6'5", 280. Bit of a larger edge, not like these guys who are built at 240. And then they go with Q Robinson, who's a very interesting prospect. I know some people love him, but low production and low athleticism. But they double up there at edge in the third, fourth round.
And yeah, Q Robinson's interesting because he has low production just because he didn't play a lot. He didn't have a lot of snaps at edge rusher. When he was playing, he was decently productive. It's just low sample size kind of player. Like you said, low athleticism. So he is a bit of a projection and a project, but in the fourth round, I don't hate that. Savion Jones, it's interesting you go with that LSU edge rusher when Braden Swinson was available on the board. That is interesting because I definitely thought out of the LSU edge rushers, I would have definitely went Braden Swinson. But again, love doubling up an edge. You can never have too much depth on the defensive line, and I'm sure these guys, they're definitely not going to start, but they'll be good rotational pieces.
Yeah, again, to positions that you never can have too many guys at because you're always going to be rotating. Getting fresh legs out there on the edge is always super valuable. So, yeah, a couple of interesting guys because, yeah, Savion's not quite refined as a pass rusher, so maybe more focus on run, and then Q just didn't play a ton. So, again, it does seem like a draft where they just identified body types or traits guys that they love that Sean Payton wants to get in there and kind of mold to his liking. So, which respect that. I mean, it clearly worked in New Orleans though when he was there. Like it's kind of hard to argue with it. So
very true.
And then they do what neither of us would ever do, and they take a punter in the sixth round. You just don't need to do it.
which hurts
Yeah,
me.
I mean, you can always we see it every offseason. Every offseason there's a handful of punters and kickers available you can just sign, and you're never going to have like one that's so elite, especially punter wise, that like changes the outlook of your franchise in any way.
That's
Um,
exactly, and I got to assume, like, if I'm putting myself in Broncos fans' shoes, and hopefully some Broncos fans watch this clip or watch this podcast, no way you're excited about that pick, right? Like, no one's happy when they see their team taking a punter. Like, no one's going to defend the pick and be like, "Oh yeah, we just desperately needed to get a 6th round punter that honestly that nobody knows anything about, dude. Nobody's scouting punters. Nobody's talking about them in the offseason. So again, it's like, why do it? You know, when there seems
yeah,
like there's more useful players left in the draft. I mean, dudes that went undrafted that seemed more useful, or dudes that actually got picked in the 7th round. Like, how many good running backs got picked in the 7th round this year? Damian Martinez or Crockett out of Arizona or whatever. So yeah, dude, there was useful players in the late rounds. So why take a punter, which is something you can just get as an undrafted free agent, it feels like.
it is crazy to think like Nick Nash, who was the Triple Crown for receiving last year, didn't get drafted, but punters and long snappers did. It's an interesting
Exactly.
process. I don't know. I mean, and the funny part is like he has decent, he had a good amount of punts inside the 20-yard line, but like his hang time is not up to NFL standards, and his average punt, you know, distance wise is just kind of okay. So it's also not, you're not like drafting like a prodigy either, which is the interesting part in it all. I don't
Yeah,
know.
it is
And
interesting.
and then they go Caleb Lawner, tight end out of Utah in the 7th. Very much a developmental guy. Not a ton on him, to be honest. He just played 43 receiving snaps in 2024. So caught only 5 passes. So just he's the dual sport athlete. So again, Sean Payton has a type, and the Broncos front office said we are leaning into that.
Very true.
So that they did sign. Did they have somebody? I'm sorry, looking at their. No, they didn't have any too notable UDFAs in terms of at least people that I know. Handful of guys though. They got a handful of linebackers, corners, some D linemen, and receivers in there. But yeah, with that in mind, Austin, what was your favorite pick?
I'm gonna steal the first rounder from you, man.
Yep.
Jahdae Barron.
Yep.
It's got to be Jahdae Barron. They didn't screw that one up, and not to say they didn't screw. Like you said, this is a draft that's going to be interesting to see how it plays out because Sean Payton got his kind of style players in there,
Right.
which like you kind of have to throw the consensus board out when you're looking at that kind of stuff. But still, like some of their later round picks, I would have done something different with. But Jahdae Barron, man, they definitely didn't screw that one up. They got one of the best players in the draft at number 20 overall. So loved that pick.
I'm gonna go best off. I'm gonna go with the punt now.
Ugh.
I'm gonna go Q Robinson. Just because of the upside of the fact that he's so raw still. Like we've not seen a ton of him, so the value of that in the 4th round of a guy that could potentially develop into a solid pass rusher for you, and also just the process of you took one already, take another. I like that. So
I like it.
cool. Well, and then we look at Renee Bugner. A guy on Twitter did a composite score across about like 20 to 25 different guys that cover the NFL, all of their draft grades per team, and essentially did a consensus across those to give them like a GPA grade and then ranked them all. We've been looking at those for each team as we've gone through these. So what did the consensus say for the Broncos?
Number 24, last in this division, it looks like. So people didn't love the picks. I think that is a little bit harsh. There's another team in this division I might rank below that. But yeah, I think people didn't love what they did outside the first round pick, which I kind of get. There was some consensus reaches in there and what have you. But I mean, if you hit big on your first round pick, then usually that draft is considered successful. They also found their starting running back in this draft as well. So even though they are 24 on this list, I think they still had a pretty solid draft.
Yeah, I think so. And again, it's tough to evaluate when at the end of the day, Sean Payton is just a different animal when it comes to these things, and the guys that he's gotten in the building with the Saints and turn them into stars. So, I mean, Alvin Kamara was a 3rd round pick. Obviously, we loved him, and he became even probably better than we thought he could in the NFL. the way that he was utilized, and then Michael Thomas, the same thing. So we'll just have to say projection. It's all projection, and we'll have to see what Sean Payton does with them. But that is the Broncos 2025 draft class. Now that puts us up onto the Los Angeles Chargers. And they did what people thought the Broncos were going to do.
They did.
Something they were mocked a ton before they signed Najee Harris in free agency, but it didn't stop them. They still take a running back, Omarion Hampton, out of North Carolina at pick 22.
I'll say right off the bat, both of those players can play. Obviously, we see that in the NFL all the time. Two men punches kind of at the running back position. So they're both going to be useful for that team. However, forcing the running back pick in the first round when you did fill the hole in free agency. I mean, Najee Harris is a solid NFL running back. He has been solid since he's been in the league. And I thought he could take over the starting role for the Chargers this season and do just fine. But they still forced the running back pick. And I will say, dude, watching the draft, they didn't seem thrilled about this. For whatever that's worth. Like, as far as, like, they show the war rooms. Some war rooms are, like, overly happy. Like, the Cowboys, when they run in the Tyler Booker pick, they were freaking out about that pick. But the Chargers looked like uneasy. They were like, we don't really want to take Hampton here. It seemed like they wanted to trade out of the pick and were disappointed they couldn't. So it doesn't mean Hampton's not a good player. I think Hampton is a good player. He was consensus number 2 running back in this draft class behind Ashton Jeanty. Now, there was a pretty big gap there between him and Jeanty. But again, from my perspective, you had already filled the hole in free agency, so I would have looked at a different position, like receiver, for example. Like Matthew Golden was on the board at this point. I thought Matthew Golden would have been a really good fit for the Chargers offense, but they decided to go running back, man. Double up after signing Najee in the free agency.
Yeah, I think the reports were that this was the first pick that Howie and the Eagles became aggressive to try to move up for Jihad Campbell. And remember, on draft night, we watched the clock tick down and thought that they had missed their pick. So I'm guessing they wanted to trade back but could not get a deal worked out in time. And to your point, it then kind of looked like they had to settle on the pick. And yeah, nothing against Omarion Hampton, the player, but it's just the process of you just signed a running back and you have other needs on this team.
Yes.
Because you need more receivers. You kind of need edge help. You just lost Joey Bosa. I know he's been hurt a lot, but also with that, you need edge help. I just think there's more, even corner. Secondary could have been better. I just think that there's more holes on the roster, and the Chargers were really good last year with a roster that probably wasn't that great overall. And that's probably the Jim Harbaugh effect of just him being a great coach. But would have just liked them to utilize the first round pick on a more valuable, more impactful player immediately. And again, that's nothing against Omarion Hampton, because he is, of this draft class totality wise, there's not a ton of guys who were both productive and really good athletes. And he does fall into that bucket. So they are getting a very good player in him that can be a 3-down back. But again, the process of just taking a running back after signing him and it kind of forcing that pick just doesn't feel great.
I agree. And I am curious, like, what their draft board looked like. Because guys that were mocked there, Kenneth Grant was mocked there a lot. They need defensive interior. He was already gone at that point. Colson Loveland, or really either one of the tight ends, but specifically Loveland, because Warren was most of the time gone. He was already gone. Of course, Bears took him. And then Jahdae Barron, I thought he was also another really good fit for the Chargers, but the Broncos had just taken him. So maybe it was one of those situations where they had other guys ranked higher, and they would have taken them, but the board just fell in a weird way. But I ultimately agree with you, man. I think just generally speaking, I like taking more impactful positions in the first round. I mean, obviously there's exceptions to that, like Ashton Jeanty, but I don't think Omarion Hampton is kind of that ilk, if you will. But we'll see, man. I mean, again, you got your starting running back. They needed a running back, but you got Najee Harris, so that's a little bit interesting decision. But it could definitely work out. Like we've said, Omarion Hampton is a good player. It's not what we would have done if we were in that spot.
Exactly. And he is very good, had a really good yards per carry after contact. He's good low center of gravity, or low center mass, so good at breaking tackles and can be utilized in different ways. So be interesting. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh does love pounding the rock. So if you have two running backs now, I guess you just take as much off of your elite quarterback's hands as possible. Get the ball out of Justin Herbert's hands as much as you can, apparently. Um, but with the second round pick, they do take some help for Justin Herbert with Trey Harris, wide receiver out of Ole Miss, a guy who had also kind of rode the wave of where he got mocked at in terms of potentially late first at different points to kind of anywhere in the second round. But they grab him at pick 55.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked this pick. Obviously, the Chargers still need receiver help. They just hit massively on Ladd McConkey last season, but they still need outside wide receivers. And because I mean, they've been keeping the Johnson thing going, even though he's been kind of hit and miss. Like he's had drop issues and has just been inconsistent overall. They brought back Mike Williams, which I thought was a solid move, but Mike Williams isn't, he's not good for all 17 games. I mean, Chargers fans know that better than anyone.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he still needed outside wide receiver help. I mean, right now, Trey Harris is literally slotted in to be the starter on our lands as an outside wide receiver. So, and he's interesting, man. Incredibly productive player. But he comes from that Ole Miss offense, which is hard to project to the NFL. Sort of like the Tennessee offense, although the Tennessee offense is a little bit worse, I would say, as far as projection the NFL is concerned. But extremely productive player. So this is a guy that's, even though he's hard to project, I mean, there is upside there because, like, I think it would be interesting to look at other Ole Miss wide receivers if they put up the kind of production numbers that Trey Harris has in that offense. Because I think that should kind of give you an indicator like, okay, maybe this guy has a special skill set. So I am intrigued to see how he looks. And listen, I mean, this doesn't mean anything, but they did just hit on their second round wide receiver a season ago. So we'll see if they can do it twice in a row.
That is true after kind of whiffing on a first round receiver and Quentin Johnston, who's listed to not start, but Trey Harris is. Obviously, it's projected off of our lads, but like he is projected to start over Quentin Johnston. So, who's a guy? He's also very good at beating man coverage, kind of best in the class per PFF grading. So that's good. And that pairing that with a guy like Ladd McConkey, who just gets open, that's usually a good indicator of success at the next level. So having two guys that can get open will make Justin Herbert's life easier. So do like that pick for them. And then they go back-to-back defensive line picks. Jamari Caldwell, defensive tackle out of Oregon. Not a very great athlete, but more of a run stuffer, 6'2", 332. And then they go Kyle Kennard, who's an interesting guy that played for 4 years at Georgia Tech. Was relatively productive there, not overly much better in a run defending perspective, but then transferred to South Carolina and ends up getting drafted here in the 4th round.
Yeah, he had more of his, like, from a pass rushing perspective, he had more of a breakout when he went to Carolina in his 5th year, which is kind of interesting because they also had Dylan Stewart, and it's like, is that part of, it probably helps quite a bit. So yeah, but again, it's defensive line help, and they needed that in a big way. That's why I kind of would have liked to see them do it in the 1st round because they still need defensive line help massively. So, I mean, again, more depth, but they could have used some starters, if I'm being honest. Just looking at the depth chart here, it doesn't look like the best defensive line in the world, but they're still, I mean, honestly, dude, they're still rebuilding this roster. This roster wasn't in a great shape when Harbaugh and team took over. So, and they did a really good job last year's draft. Obviously, you get Joe Alt and Ladd McConkey.
Yeah.
And if they can hit on Hampton and Trey Harris, then all of a sudden it's still moving in the right direction. And so, but as far as these D linemen are concerned, I think they are just more depth rotational pieces.
Yeah, can have too many bodies along the defensive line, and then they double up with pass catchers again in the 5th round. So 2 picks in the 5th go Keandre Lambert-Smith, wide receiver out of Auburn, who ran a 4.37. Very athletic guy who was also pretty productive. Transferred from Penn State to Auburn for his last season, similar to Kyle Kennard, and had a solid season and actually was ninth in the FBS in yards per reception. So kind of a vertical threat guy, stretched the field out a bit, which they could use in this offense where, especially with Ladd, who's really good underneath and getting open. So, and then they get Oronde Gadsden, the second tight end out of Syracuse. So decently productive guy there as well. Had 73 catches this past season, 7 touchdowns, starting all 13 games. So add 2 more pass catchers, but waited on tight end, which is something people kind of expected them to do a little bit sooner.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably because they just felt like the value wasn't there once Colson. Again, that's why, dude, I would just love to get in these teams' war rooms or just them tell us retrospectively, okay, they'll never do this. Obviously, this will never happen. But if we could just get their boards and see, because it would have been interesting if Colson Loveland was on the board, if they go Colson Loveland. And man, if you went Colson Loveland and Trey Harris with your first 2 picks, all of a sudden, I think people would view this draft a little bit differently. But yeah, I mean, more depth as far as, like you said, pass catchers for Herbert's concerned. They're still attacking the position, which, I love that they're attacking that very important position that they, as we just discussed, still need help at. So, and Lambert was a really good athlete, ran a 4.37. So we'll see.
Yeah, they now add, Gadsden to a tight end room that has Will Dissly, and they just signed Tyler Conklin. So as far as I'm concerned, he has a pretty easy path to get some reps there potentially.
Yeah,
so
yeah, exactly.
He could be fighting for some spot. Yeah. They then go Branson Taylor, developmental guard out of Pitt. RJ Mickens out of Clemson, who's a bit interesting. He was pretty athletic and also relatively productive at Clemson. He actually had the 5th round projection on him and goes in the 6th. They get some decent value on him. And then Treguesi Bridges, corner out of Florida. So go with a guard in the 6th and then double up with DBs. There it is.
Yeah, Mickens was one of my favorite picks for them. That was decent value. He's also really high on the PFF board for whatever that's worth, which is basically, as we've mentioned, Dakota, just Trevor Sickham's board. But he was 108 on his board, which is good value. He also, I mean, he graded well, so he was a productive player in college. But yeah, I mean, more depth in the secondary. They drafted in volume, man, which I love typically. Just more shots, more at bats. So yeah, I mean, again, this is a draft that I think it's going to be dependent. Like if Amarian Hampton isn't a game changing back, people will look on this draft in kind of a negative light. And running backs that have gone later in the first round of recent years haven't really worked out as much. But we'll see. And also, if they can hit on Trey Harris, then I think that could define this draft class as well, because you hit back-to-back years on second-round receivers and kind of rebuild this receiving core that was depleted. Be really good for Herbert and the Chargers.
Yeah, absolutely. And Taylor, the tackle from Pitt, had a season-ending knee injury in Week 7, so the potential he would have gone a little bit higher had he not be coming off of an injury. And then Bridges was pretty productive. He started at Oregon before coming to Florida. Pretty good run defender, so maybe not as good in coverage, but can come up and help in the run game. So let's look at they had a couple interesting UDFA signings. Most notably DJ Ungalele, so quarterback from Florida State, who was also at Oregon State, and Clemson before that. Had quite a journey. He was a 5-star though, so getting him to potentially come in and compete for a backup spot, which, Herbert has fought through injuries pretty often. But, having somebody to potentially develop a little bit behind him does not hurt. Will he make the roster? We'll see, because they signed Trey Lance and they already have Taylor Heineke, so we'll see how that goes.
My guess is no. But hopefully
after watching him in college, I'm going to go with no.
Yeah, hopefully he saved some of his Dr. Pepper money from the first major NIL deal. Feels like on that Dr. Pepper commercial way back when. But yeah, DJU, we'll see how that works out for him. But they did also get a ton of guys in the UDFA market. So just looking for some depth, and I'm sure at least one of these guys will end up making the team.
Yeah, Raheem Sanders is a really interesting one, running back, South Carolina. If I remember correctly, his nickname was Rocket Sanders. He's a guy that was at Arkansas, I believe, first, and then transferred to South Carolina. So another potential running back depth piece there as well. And then, a handful of other guys. Get in there. All right. With that in mind, what was your favorite pick for the Chargers?
I'll go Mickens in the 6th round. I
All
thought I
right.
thought that was solid value for them, and he could possibly find himself on the roster, and making an impact. He's obviously not going to start over Derwin James, but he'll I'm
Right.
sure he'll find a role.
Love it. I'm going to go Trey Harris. Give me the pass catcher. I like the value of him in the second round there, and I think his skill set will go well alongside Lad McConkey and the others. Mainly him because those two are going to be their potential future receivers to stick around for a while. So
I like it.
like that value there. All right. What does the consensus say about the Chargers?
They are right in front of division rivals, the Denver Broncos, at number 23 in the NFL. And I get this one. Like the Chargers, they drafted in volume, which people like. I mean, I would always, if we ever start grading drafts, I'll always give people a bonus for having more than the allotted 7 picks. But they also, I think some people didn't like the first round pick, even though they got a good player. There was other players there that were at more valuable positions that were probably comparable, like Matthew Golden, as I've mentioned. So I get it.
Yeah, I did too. I think a lot of guys probably knock for first round running back, especially in a situation where they were in where you just signed one, but they
Yeah.
still got some good guys in the class that could potentially play. So, um, all right, that is the Chargers 2025 draft class. Now on to the defending AFC champions, the Kansas
Yes.
City Chiefs. So to simulate three-peating, they trade back to pick 32. And take a guy who kind of fell into their lap because a guy who got mocked at 25 pretty often to the Texans, who obviously traded back. But they get Josh Simmons, tackle out of Ohio State.
Yeah, man. One of my favorite picks of the first round. Honestly, one of my favorite drafts in the NFL, the Kansas City Chiefs. Thought they had a really good draft. And like you said, they let the board come to them, which honestly they could have gotten they could have gotten scared in this draft because some of those offensive linemen started going before we thought they would. And
Yeah.
I mean, like Kelvin Banks. I mean, Kelvin Banks is a guy that, in a lot of mocks was in the teens, and he ends up going top 10. So I wouldn't have been surprised at all if the Chiefs got a little scared and said, okay, we need to trade up to, pick 20, 25 to go ahead and lock up Josh Simmons, but they just stayed put. And even traded back and picked up an extra 5th, like you said, with the Eagles trade. And they got a potentially, franchise tackle. And they obviously, and Chiefs fans know this, that they need it bad because that was one
Yeah.
of the main reasons that they lost the Super Bowl last season, because they just didn't have the offensive line that could hold up and protect Mahomes. And honestly, Mahomes has been like very like tackle dependent in some ways, like years that he doesn't have good tackle play, or go back to the Bucks Super Bowl, another Super Bowl they
Mm-hmm.
lost, when the tackle play wasn't up to par. The offense just doesn't function as well. So I think Josh Simmons is great value at one of, or probably the biggest position of need for the Chiefs.
Yeah, usually don't love drafting for need, but when it falls into your lap like that, and when you're in a roster position like the Chiefs too, you sometimes just have to do that. And it's interesting. He's slated, according to our lads, to start behind Jalen Moore to be his backup, but I highly doubt that sticks. It's probably just because he is coming off of the knee injury, and to be honest, he probably goes higher if it weren't for that. But he only gave up like 2 sacks in the past 2 seasons, so pretty solid prospect. And yeah, can slot him in alongside Juwan Taylor as the 2 tackles to try to help protect Mahomes after, yeah, they kind of got torn apart by what some people are now replicating in the Eagles model of just loading up on so many defensive linemen that you can rotate them out there and attack. So I love the pick for them, and I love the value there at 32 as well.
Yeah, it was really good value because it seemed like everyone was overdrafting offensive linemen, and whereas the Chiefs ended up getting one of the better, I guess, consensus steals, if you will, for an offensive lineman. So I just thought, I mean, I won't say he was the best player available, but he was definitely one of the best players available. And like you said, in a position like the Chiefs where you're trying to win Super Bowls, man. Like
Yeah.
that's the Chiefs' goal. They're not trying to just compete and make the playoffs. They're trying to win Super Bowls. So it makes more sense for a team like that to say, okay, we are just going to attack this position that was clearly, like our kryptonite last year. So
Yeah, love it. And then they go with one of our VFLs, Omar Norman Lott in the second round, who was kind of a polarizing prospect, to be honest. I feel like some people were incredibly high on him, other people were really low on him. And I think at the end of the day, it comes down to two things, which is one, he was incredibly difficult to evaluate from a run defense perspective because he did not have many run defense snaps. And then two, he kind of broke out towards the end of his career, but was kind of an elite pass rusher this past season for Tennessee.
Yeah, and I will say, as far as the breakout's concerned, I think we can kind of explain that. I mean, he was kind of
Yeah,
further back on the rotation. Like, he just didn't get as much playing time. But when he started playing more, he, like you said, he really did break out and was an elite pass rusher last year. So getting an elite defensive interior pass rusher at 63 overall, I think is phenomenal value. He went a little bit above where he was consensus wise, but about his consensus range though. It wasn't like a reach or anything. Um, but honestly, I mean, like you said, he was a bit polarizing. I mean, Trevor and PFF had him ranked like the 27th player or something like that at
first
the end.
round. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. As a first round talent. Um, and I mean, I love this pick, dude. And I'm a little biased. I love Omar Norman a lot, but I think pairing him with a guy like Chris Jones and adding him to that defensive line rotation is phenomenal, dude. And I think they got good value in the second round.
yeah, and even if he can't be a three down player, like the value of interior pass rush has grown greatly over the past few seasons. I mean, Milton Williams, after one good season, just got handed a ton of money by the Patriots. Um, and he was elite at it. His pass rush win rate led all of college football for interior defensive linemen, and his grade against true pass set, his rushing grade against true pass sets was in the 95th percentile. So he is a elite pass rusher, and pairing that alongside Chris Jones on the interior will be a little terrifying for other opposing offensive lines.
No doubt. And as we saw at Tennessee, he might be better in the rotational role. Like, that might just be
True.
that best fits him because that's how he broke out. I mean, that's like, if you look at his snap totals, it's not a lot, but as Tennessee fans, we know that we were rotating like 12 deep last year and that no one, even James Pierce Jr., a first round pick, didn't play every series. So, it might be good for Omar Norman Lott that he's not expected to be slotted in as a starter, but he can be behind a guy like Chris Jones and just come in on pass rush situations.
Yeah, it definitely going to be able to rotate him early on, and because of the already having a guy like Chris Jones, don't have to rely on him to do too much immediately, so you can let him kind of grow into his own. Um, they then continue adding on the defensive line with some more
Yep.
pass rush capability, and Ashton Gelati, DN from Louisville, um, who had, in terms of PFF stuff again, had a pretty solid pass rush grade and is also a very good run defender.
Yeah, I thought this was, I mean, good value, man. I think Ashton Gelati's a really productive college player and third round edge rusher. I mean, again, it's the kind of guy that I think in most classes is probably more of a second round talent. But since this edge class was so loaded, he goes in the third round. So again, I thought this was solid value for the Chiefs. And again, adding to that defensive line depth, man. They lost to the Eagles, and everybody's saying in the offseason, oh man, look how the Eagles won the Super Bowl. They built through the trenches and they had one of the best defensive lines in the league that, again, rolled probably about 8 to 10 guys deep. So everyone's trying to duplicate that, and I get it. And the Chiefs continue doing that, and I like it, man. I think he will be, again, kind of like Omar Norman Lott, not a guy that's going to start, but a
Right.
part of that rotation and can make an impact on, pass rush downs.
Absolutely. And then they go after, sorry, with Ashton Gelati too. He actually was like the third most athletic edge rusher according to Next Gen Stats and like the profile thing they do. So he's also incredibly athletic. He had a 36.5-inch vertical at 6'3", 264. So
It's
he's
just
got
kind of
burst.
it's kind of shocking, a guy that has college production who is athletic going in the third round. Again, I think it's just because of like there was like 10 edge rushers that people are like, oh, these are first round talents. So everyone just gets kind of moved down the board. But dude, Ashton Gelati could legitimately become a steal in the third round for the Chiefs.
Absolutely. And then kind of another, you could consider him a steal, but then they go corner Noel Williams out of Cal, who was not didn't test super well, ran a 4.5, but was really productive in college and is also notorious for being the guy that caught one of Cam Ward's worst plays when he was
Yeah.
rolling to his right, threw back across his body. Noel Williams pick six that in that game. So pick up Noel in the fourth.
Yeah. I thought again that was also pretty solid
That's
value
right
for
there.
them. Yeah, yeah, third round. I think it was towards the end of the third round, but yeah, I mean, adding to the secondary depth, man, and like you said, Noel Williams is kind of a ball hawk in college, like that Cam Ward play he had, and yeah, I mean, he's listed as a second on the depth chart right now on our lads, so yeah, he could end up making an impact for that defense.
Yeah, probably sooner rather than later because he's listed behind Christian Fulton, who has hopped around a little bit. And as a Titans fan, hit or miss there. So we'll see. He may be able to get some playing time a little bit sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
And then they had probably what for both of us was one of our favorite picks in the entire draft. And they take Jalen Royals
Yeah.
with a pick at the very end of near the end of the fourth round. Athletic, productive receiver at Utah State. Didn't play against the highest competition, but was just very good for Utah State.
They have been ever since the Sky Moore pick, they've really been hitting on these wide receivers they've been taking. Now, have they had questions off the field? Yes, they have, and that has kind of come back to bite them. But I think they could possibly hit one more time with Jalen Rules, dude. And the receiving core is in a good spot, but like I said, so many of these guys have question marks. Like Rashee Rice is like may or may not get suspended at some point. Xavier Worthy's dealing with stuff off the field, and then Hollywood Brown is like, I mean, that's kind of like rent a receiver at this point. He's like on 1 year deals. So yeah, Jalen Rules, dude, could make an impact this season. And I think again, since the Sky Moore miss, they have been really good at evaluating wide receivers. So, and you have Patrick Mahomes, which helps.
Yeah, and what's funny is that a lot of people comps for Jalen Royals was Rashee Rice. So who's been good when he's on the field,
Yes, very
but you got
good.
to get him on the field. So if he can be that as well for Mahomes is, clicks with receivers like that. So that's another reason I love it. It's just a guy with his skill set fits so well with the way Mahomes plays. So love that for them. They then go Jeffrey Bassa, linebacker out of Oregon in the fifth round. Decent athlete, you know, decent production as well. Developmental type guy to plug in for some depth. And then Brashard Smith, they take a running back at SMU in the seventh round to add some more depth to that room that has kind of changed a lot over the past few years. Decent athlete, ran a 4.39, but adding him to a running back room that has Kareem Hunt, Isaiah Pacheco, and then they actually signed Elijah Mitchell. So
Every time I see a running back like Brashid Smith be taken in the seventh round, I'm like, I would never spend a pick on a running back in the first 3 rounds, dude. Like this is a good
literally,
college player. I mean, he was really, really good in college. And I mean, the Chiefs have already hit on late round running backs in Isaiah Pacheco. I believe he was a 6th round pick. So, or maybe even undrafted free agent. What was Pacheco? Was he a 6th round picker?
he was seventh.
7th, there you go. So they've already hit on 7th round running back before in their recent history. And the Chiefs are a perfect example for this, right, Dakota? Because in 2020, what did they do? They took Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and he has been by far their least productive running back over the last few years. But their 7th round pick, Isaiah Pacheco, ends up being one of their more productive backs. So that's they're kind of like a case study of why you don't overly invest in that position when you can get a guy like Brashid Smith, who is a very productive player in college, in the 7th round. Thought it was great value, man.
Yeah, they really are a great study on that because they also when they first took Kareem Hunt as well, he was a 3rd round pick back way in 2017. So, they're then taking Clyde Edwards-Helaire and it just completely whiffing. And he was with the Saints last season. His career in Kansas City did not live up to being a 1st round draft pick. So yeah, take late round running backs and then just cycle through them. To be
Agreed.
honest, that's what you do and it works out. So love adding a guy like that in the 7th. to add more depth to that running back room and future proof it a little bit, at least for in the interim. From a UDFA perspective, they did sign a fullback.
Okay.
Elijah Badger, wide receiver out of Florida, is a guy that was potentially projected to get drafted. And then also really interesting one is Jake Briningstool, tight end out of Clemson. Travis Kelce replacement,
Maybe,
UDFA, maybe.
maybe
We'll see.
they also signed our boy Will Brooks until they cut him like a week later. So Will Brooks
Yeah.
is no longer on the roster, unfortunately. But yeah, dude. I mean, they had an interesting UDFA class. But overall, as far as their draft class, dude, I think this is one of the best classes in the NFL. We're not ranking them this year, but if I did rank them, it just feels like they got pretty good value at every single one of their picks. Like it was
Yeah.
like, oh man, this guy solid value here. And they also attacked positions of, I guess, need, if you will, even though we say you don't draft for need, but it's nice when great players, great consensus value lines up with need as well. And I think that was the case with Jalen Royals and Josh Simmons in the first round. So I think overall, really good draft for the Chiefs, man.
Yeah, again, doing what we say is letting the board fall to you, and they just did a fantastic job of that and taking guys that are just good football players.
Yep.
Yeah, they didn't even get to see poor Will Brooks go to playing camp before they were like, we're not going to
Yeah.
be a part of this anymore.
We're
They saw him
good,
in
man.
person once. They also had a ton of mini camp invites, like more than a lot of other teams. They just had a ton of guys invited just to mini camp. So a lot of guys getting in there to fight for some roster spots. With that in mind, what was your favorite pick? Full bias?
I'm gonna go bias, man. Omar Norman Lott, second rounder, dude. I think this is a pick that could really work out for them, add to that defensive line depth. And I mean, I just don't know how many good defensive interior pass rushers go in the second round. Usually a guy of that pass rush profile is a first round talent. So I like Omar Norman Lott in the second round, man.
Love it. Shout out Simmons for them just taking the guy that fell to them, but I'm going to go Jalen Royals in the fourth. Love the value of him there. Love his skill set in this offense with Patrick Mahomes. Think he could make an impact sooner rather than later, much like a lot of these guys like Rashee Rice that they've drafted a little bit later. So love that fit for them. What did the consensus say for the Chiefs?
We're kind of lining up with the consensus here, man. Number 4 overall in the NFL, top 5 draft according to the consensus. And I totally agree with it, man. I could even see pushing them a little bit higher on this list here, which is crazy to say when they're already number 4. So I thought they had one of the best drafts in the league, and the consensus agrees.
Yeah, the rich get richer.
Yeah,
This is what helps create dynasties when you both have like a top 3 quarterback in the NFL consistently, and you draft well and build a good roster. So Chiefs do it again.
They do.
That is the Chiefs 2025 class. So now we are on to the last team in the division, the Las Vegas Raiders, who've had one of the more interesting off seasons in general, with hiring Pete Carroll, trading for Geno, and then doing what was chalk for a minute, but people started to go back and forth on, and they do take Ashton Genty, running back out of Boise State, 6th overall.
There was reports kind of later in the draft cycle, which always seem to be more accurate. The later the report, it seems the more accurate of the report, that they would possibly go tackle with this pick, and they were looking at Kelvin Banks. But like you said, they end up going to the chalk pick, and for all the things we've said about running back, those all go out the window when you're talking about an elite player like Ashton Genty. Ashton Genty is one of the best running back prospects of this generation, man. I mean, probably best running back prospect. Bijan and him would be pretty close, but definitely right up there with Saquon and guys like that. So a very elite prospect. And the Raiders are also in a more interesting position. Like when Saquon went to the Giants at 2, they have had a bad offensive line then, and it never got better. The Raiders offensive line isn't awful. It's not awful. It's not the best in the league. It's not like it's top 10, but it's a solid average, I would say, offensive line, which is not typical for teams drafting in the top 10. But with that being said, when you already have an average offensive line, I get taking the running back, especially when we're talking about a guy like Ashton Genty, who is truly, we don't like to throw this term around a lot, Dakota, but generational type player as far as college production and things like that are concerned.
Yeah, I I'm still torn on it personally, and I can take heat for it. I don't know if I would have taken Ginty if I were the Raiders. I may have gone in a different direction. Um, but I absolutely love Ginty the player, and I do kind of like the fit with the Raiders and him coming in um, to kind of honestly be potentially the face of the franchise for them now as well. They've got Max Crosby on the defensive side, but adding a guy like Ginty on the offensive side, where they've not really had a major offensive weapon for a minute. Um, I do love that aspect of it, and Ginty as a player. I mean, the guy is elite at everything he does. He is incredible at breaking tackles, and the whole playing. I hated all the arguments with him and playing at the level that he's playing at because his offensive line is also worse at Boise State than it would be at an SEC program, and he's still doing what he's doing. And breaking tackles is the biggest indicator, and if you do that well, it doesn't really matter where you're playing.
He did it against better composition for one, and also another thing is why aren't other players as productive as Genty was
Yeah,
in those I
great
mean there's
weapons.
those teams play every year. The group of 5 teams play every single year, but no one's been as productive as Ashton Genty was. So, and I get the competition questions. You have to ask those questions, but when you see him against Penn State and they're literally putting 8 in the box every single play, like right there, all of a sudden you can already say from a coaching perspective, right? Penn State clearly knows Ashton Genty is who people say he is. Like he's like by putting 8 in the box, they're saying, okay, this guy, we're not going to let this guy beat us. Like what we're going to make them pass on us. But also in that game, Dakota, even though the stats weren't there, dude, he was phenomenal in that game. But
Mhm.
there's only so much you can do when they're putting 8 guys in the box and he's breaking 3 tackles a play and getting 3 yards out of it. Like there's only so much you can do as a running back. So I think the competition questions were answered in the college football playoff, even though he didn't put up the stats in that game. And again, and I get it from your perspective too. Like, listen, number 6 overall is high for a running back. That is extremely high for a running back. And like, look at the Bijan thing, right? Like, can Falcons fans truly say Bijan has been worth taking number 8 overall at this point in his career? I don't think you can. Now that they have their franchise quarterback, maybe things will change and, Bijan will start to become more productive. But again, I think in a Pete Carroll offense, right? I mean, Pete Carroll still remembering the
Oh yeah.
days when they had Russell Wilson, who was frankly in early in his career was more of a game managing type quarterback with Marshawn Lynch, and they relied on the run game. And Geno Smith is I wouldn't even call Geno a game manager, but he's not an elite level quarterback, Dakota. He's not. But he's
Yeah.
really good, right? He's really good. He's shown the last few years at Seattle that he's really good. But how do you make a guy like Geno kind of like elevate his play? Bring a guy like Ashton Genty in who can be an elite running back and start loading up on weapons, which I think, we'll get into. They did a pretty good job of doing throughout the rest of the draft. So, specifically for the Raiders in the top 10, out of any of the other teams drafting in the top 10 outside the Bears, I get
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and I definitely like it more than I liked the Bijan pick because with the Falcons at that time they had just drafted Tyler Algier in the late round and had a really good year as a rookie, and then you draft a running back 8th overall. Raiders have no one, and they were dead last in PFF rushing grade last season. The Zamir White stuff hadn't worked out. They just have not had a running game for a minute. So I do like it from that perspective, and I understand it. I don't hate it. It's just I could have seen going in a different direction, but I do think the value of that is really is good for the Raiders and pairing him with Geno, and kind of getting to play football the way that Pete Carroll wants to. Definitely have to note too that like Genty's known for his breaking tackles. 152 missed tackles forced last season, but he's also just so explosive.
Yes.
He had 10. He's the only back in college football with 10 or more touchdown runs of 20 plus, and he had 12. So the guy could just take anything to the house at any minute. So he will make, and that's one of the effects we've taught, has come up with Saquon a lot, is the value of having a guy that probably once a game is going to bust a 40 plus yard run is pretty
Extremely
valuable.
valuable.
So
Extremely
yeah,
valuable, man. And another note with Genty too is he has more to unlock in his passing game as far as a
Yeah.
receiving back is concerned. They just didn't utilize that
Yeah.
last year at Boise, but he's actually really good at it, man. He showed it throughout his college career that he can be a scat back type. So he's truly a 3 down running back that's going to stay on the field every down, no matter what the circumstances. So I mean, he's a fascinating prospect, and again, it's just another case study of, is it worth taking a running back this high in the draft? Like, is it worth it? And again, I've just mentioned all the 7th round running backs that are going to be productive and stuff, but the most important thing with drafting is hitting on the player. That is the most important thing. Making sure the
True.
player is going to be a good player. And I think there's a very small percentage that Genty's not going to be a good player, right? Like, he's very likely going to become at least a productive NFL player at some point in his career. So I get it from the Raiders perspective, and from the face of the franchise perspective, man. Like,
Yeah.
no one's gonna sell more jerseys than Ashton Genty this year for the Raiders. So
Going to see a lot of those number 2 jerseys out there for sure. They then attack the offense in round 2 with Jack Besh, wide receiver out of TCU. He has a really cool story. His brother passed away from the terrorist attack that was in New Orleans. And then at the Senior Bowl, it was just like 1 month after that, he ends up having the game-winning touchdown, which was just a really cool moment. Seems like he's one of those guys too, from a character perspective, which Genty has that going for him as well, that you just would want in your locker room. Decent athlete, was pretty productive at TCU. Has an interesting skill set that I think could plug into their offense and get playing time pretty soon.
oh yeah, I mean, he's listed as a starter right now on our lands or Outlats, dude. So that is very interesting. And I also love the point that you just brought up as far as locker room guys are concerned. It does feel like the Raiders are kind of due for like a reset as far as the culture is
Yeah.
concerned. Like, it feels like that's kind of been kind of rough since the McDaniels era, where, like, he was pretty hated by players, and then they had Antonio Pierce, and it seemed like the players liked him, but he just wasn't, he wasn't ready to be head coach. So they are kind of due for that reset. And you're right, dude. Taking Jack Besh and Ashton Genty with your first 2 picks, that's a locker room reset. I mean, those are 2 very high character
Mm-hmm.
guys, which has to be taken into account. But they're also good players. And Jack Besh is not an exception to that. He's also a very good player. And like I said, slated to start. Like, this is a receiving core that desperately needs help. I think Raiders fans know that since losing Devontae Adams. They are, Jacoby Myers is a good number 2 wide receiver, but you don't want him as your number 1 option, man. You really don't. Now you get Jack Besh in there to be another option as well, and then they continue to attack it throughout the draft. So
Absolutely. Love him in the second round there to pair with Geno Smith, get some weapons out there on that offense alongside Genty as well. And then in the third round, they take one of the more interesting prospects in the entire draft, Darian Porter, corner out of Iowa State, insane athlete, ran a 4.3 and had a 1.49 10-yard split, but is so fascinating. He was in college for 6 years, and we still kind of just don't know what he is. He only had like 7 games this past season of starting at corner. He was at wide receiver at one point, but he actually looked really good when he finally slotted in and started playing corner full time.
yeah, this is one of the biggest X factors in the draft, because Darian Porter had first round tape at cornerback this past season, but like you said, late breakout just because he was never given an opportunity at corner. He was a wide receiver for a long time and a special teams player, and then when he was finally given his opportunity at cornerback, he broke out in college, and also an extremely high level athlete with high level production at cornerback with the very few amount of snaps he's had. So I mean, this could be a guy who ends up being one of the best corners from the class that you got in the 3rd round, just because, it is a bit of a risk, because you just don't know. There's so many question marks about him as far as, sample size is concerned, that you can't really take that risk higher than the 3rd round. But again, you could get a first round talent in the 3rd round. So I think it is worth the risk in the 3rd round. So I really loved that pick, man. Again, another guy that I think will find his way onto the field. He's not listed as a starter right now, but he's behind Eric Stokes. I don't think Eric Stokes is going to stop him from starting. So I think Porter will end up being a starting cornerback at some point for the Raiders, which again, very valuable in the third round. So I love that pick.
And I love the fit. I mean, he is a Pete Carroll guy, 6'3". He
Yep.
loves his tall, long corners. You know, Richard Sherman and those guys were kind of really one of the ones that revolutionized the position to a degree, where it was always you want a smaller guy, but with athleticism changing and guys at 6'3" running 4.3s and having the agility they do, having length and size at corner like that is valuable. And I know Pete Carroll is going to, they were probably frothing at the mouth to get him into the building. So going to love to see him in that defense. They then double up offensive linemen. Couple guys that, again, the Raiders' offensive line is not in great shape, but they double up with Caleb Rogers and Charles Grant, a couple guys who I would consider them more than developmental. I think they're guys that could come in and start competing for jobs along that offensive line, or at least, you know, shorter development times to earn a spot on it. And then this division had two of the only, you know, 3 Vols we had drafted. But then they take wide receiver Dante Thornton Jr. Again, we have this first person perspective on him. Another fascinating prospect. He was started at Oregon, transferred to Tennessee in 2023. Didn't really do much. He got hurt at the end of the year. We didn't see him much in 2023. And to be honest, we were kind of like disappointed because he was supposed to be this big Oregon receiver that was transferring over and break out. But then in 2024 leads the team, but did not have very many catches and was a guy we were sitting there thinking, why are we not targeting him more?
Yeah, he was the best wide receiver on Tennessee's offense in 2024. There's no question about that. He has big play threat, man. That's who he is. I think his comp is DK Metcalf, but just not as big. Like he's a smaller version of DK, 6'5", running a 4.3, which is just stupid. I mean, that is stupid size and athleticism. He's just he has a limited route tree. I mean, he's more of a slants and goes kind of player. But that plays, man, that's gonna be interesting. And it's also fascinating pairing him with Geno Smith, who just came having a guy like DK Metcalf and, you know, and DK Metcalf being coached by Pete Carroll. So all of that is interesting when we're talking about like guys that fit into certain offenses and, you know, coaches fits. And it's interesting that they target a guy like Dante Thornton, which I think they probably see a little bit of DK in Dante. And Dante Thornton's going to play, man. I mean, right now he's listed behind Trey Tucker. I could see Dante Thornton taking Trey Tucker's job pretty early on. So they're attacking this offense, man, and they needed to. Like you said, they're getting offensive line depth. I think Charles Grant could get into play sooner rather than later. Bringing in 2 wide receivers. I mean, they loaded up on offense, dude, to start this draft. Loading weapons around Geno, which I think is smart because, again, Geno is a good quarterback. Don't get me wrong, Raiders fans. You got a good quarterback. It's just he's not a guy that elevates, right? He's a guy that kind of needs good weapons around him to be successful. And I think they did that for Geno in this draft, dude. I think they got more great weapons around him, beefing up the offensive line, and of course bringing in Genty.
Yeah, and Thornton is interesting too because to your point with having just played with DK, he is a smaller version of him, but averaged his yards per reception last year were 25.5, which is just absurd. It's basically saying like obviously statistically it's not the same, but like basically you throw the ball to him 4 times and you score a touchdown, which is kind of insane. And I love pairing his skill set alongside Jack Betch, who's going to be more of an underneath route running type guy. You get Thornton, who can stretch the field and blaze with that speed. So I love the 2 different types that they got to pair alongside Geno and Genty. And then a bunch of depth guys they had a ton of picks. So they get Tonka Hemingway, D tackle out of South Carolina, JJ Puegs, the D tackle out of Ole Miss. So double up at D tackle, adding some depth there. And then an interesting pick. They go back to back, 2 picks apart. Quarterback Tommy Mellett out of Montana State, who's apparently going to be trying out at wide receiver. Guy's just very athletic. So they wanted to bring him in, flip him to receiver, see what they can do with him. Very interesting. And then they take actual quarterback Cam Miller out of North Dakota State, who now has kind of produced a good amount, whether they're great starters or not. I got a North Dakota State quarterbacks in the league now who are backing up places or were starters at one point.
Yeah, I thought Yeah, I agree. Those two picks were interesting. The Tommy Mellett pick is very interesting because, quarterback to wide receiver, extremely athletic, ran in the 4.3s if I'm not mistaken. So it's going to be fascinating. And again, with the receiver depth on this team, he could find his way on the roster. Crazy enough, dude. I don't know. I don't know if this is going to be the case, but right now on Our Lads, he is listed behind Jacoby Myers, which is insane, dude. If this dude makes an NFL team as a wide receiver from playing quarterback in college, it's a fascinating story. And then Cam Miller was really good in the Colorado game. I watched him against Colorado this past season. He was really good in that game. I was just really impressed with him throughout that entire game. So very, very productive college player. And like you said, North Dakota State has this history now of putting out, you know, NFL quarterbacks. Like they haven't really worked out. They've been drafted highly, but they haven't worked out. But this one's, developmental guy in the 6th. So I like it.
I mean, hey, Wentz was a knee injury away from potentially winning an MVP. He was having a very good year that year. Then they wrap things up with Cody Lindenberg, linebacker out of Minnesota. Always feel good about your Minnesota linebackers. Depth piece there for sure. UDFA-wise, one thing stood out here, which is Dorian Singer, wide receiver from Utah, who kind of transferred around over the place. But I think I don't know if he was a 5-star, but I think he was at least a 4-star receiver. That was a pretty big signing when he happened. So a guy that could potentially have some upside. That was a high recruit coming out of high school. But yeah, with that in mind, what was your favorite pick for the Raiders?
Man, I kind of want to be biased again, dude. I really do. I don't know. Honestly, there's a lot of picks to choose from here.
Yeah,
I liked
really
a lot of their picks. I'm gonna go Darian Porter though in the 3rd round.
Okay.
This is a guy that really could end up being one of the better corners in the class in the 3rd round. So really love that pick.
I'll be biased. I'll do the bias this time. I'll say Dante Thornton. I just think, again, a lot of mine have been based on what they do before or after that, and I just love the value of that. So I love the fact that they double up at wide receiver in the first 4 rounds. They needed it. I mean, looking at their depth chart, there are guys on here. There's a reason Tommy Mellett's listed as 2nd string, and it's probably because the Our Lads dudes don't know who Alex Bachman and Tyreek McAllister are.
Yeah. Well, I don't either, so I'm right there with.
No, I don't want to show it either. Yeah, I don't know who they are. So I love and Thornton's skill set. I think with Pete Carroll having drafted and coached DK Metcalf, obviously they're different. Like they are different. Dante's not shredded and a massive specimen, but he's going to stretch the field. He's going to run some slants, take them to the house. He can contested catch or burn downfield. So love that for Geno after having DK in Seattle.
Same.
What does the consensus say about the Raiders?
The Raiders, let's see here. Why can I not find them on the list? They were pretty high up, if I'm not mistaken. Oh yeah, here we are. They're very high up, 6th overall in the NFL. So top 6 draft in the league. I kind of agree with it, man. Like I get it's going to be very dependent on Genty, and if Genty can live up to being a top 6 overall pick. But throughout the draft, I thought they just hit on a couple guys, which they're not hits yet, but you know what I mean? They got good consensus value. They attacked positions of need, and that I think they needed to attack like wide receiver. They brought in 3 wide receivers who apparently are all slated to either start or be, right behind starters. So I think overall it was a solid draft for the Raiders, who really needed to reset and to rebuild, and I think they started that process.
Yeah, I agree with it too. They had 2, 4, 6, 7 picks in the top 135, and I think they put them all to valuable positions and added depth and guys to come compete. A lot of it will be predicated on what Ashton Genty becomes. But one thing I would also give them a bump for is they drafted in volume. They had 11 picks, and they didn't take any punters, long snappers, or kickers.
There you go.
You don't have to do that just because you have a ton of picks. So
exactly, that's a good point.
Yeah. Cool. So that is the Raiders 2025 class, and that wraps up the AFC West. 7 down.
Yep.
1 to go.
1 to go, baby.
1 to go. So we will do the NFC West next. Please, like, share, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. Leave us some comments. Let us know what you think about draft classes, or anything we said that you hated. We will look at everything. Yeah, we love the feedback regardless. Want to see what you guys think. But appreciate everybody for tuning in. And until next time.
Thanks for talking ball with us.